folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. Got my first Roundup post of the year. It's a little bit different than the preview post we were doing before. This tier 2 set of albums are going to be the ones we compare against all that stuff we're listening to in January and February. And we'll sift through it all and come up with a really good list of albums for our mid-year top 12. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one being Timmy Sean's music from and inspired by Noisewater.
All she knows of the movies and the TV shows, and there she goes with the makeup and the powder nose. She has her woes, but something in her eyes is telling me she thinks she's got some more in store. Never had her dreams, Hollywood and stone, but they left along the way.
Timmy Sean was the creator of the now classic 2021 album, Tale from the Other Side, which is a COVID-inspired power pop rock opera. Totally brilliant from beginning to end. And I really loved that album when it came out. And was looking forward to checking out the rest of his catalog whenever I kind of got a little bit of space from that album. I was so connected to it, I didn't want to let my impressions of it bleed over into other stuff. But I was surprised to see he only had one album in addition to this one in his catalog, and that is this album. And I see now that one of the characteristic factors of Timmy Sean's music that made A Tale from the Other Side so successful, I think, was its sort of way that it leans toward the theatrical side of power pop. From a compositional standpoint, it wouldn't take too much to tweak his music into like a Broadway production. And music from Noisewater carries that same sort of feel to it. However, in comparison to its successor, music from Noisewater doesn't really have a central theme, although it does kind of suggest that there might be one with the existence of things like the overture. But each of these songs, relatively speaking, stands alone in its own sort of self-encapsulated world. Now, to really enjoy Timmy Sean's music, I think you have to be at least an appreciator of the genius of Paul McCartney, especially his Wings era. He really likes to refer to this time in McCartney's history where, you know, the rock band kind of expanded into an orchestra. And that was also a characteristic of ELO's music. And I think that's another thing you can kind of compare Timmy Sean's music to favorably. His particular spin, however, is to take that 70s style of big production music and kind of put it through the sieve of 90s Weezer-esque slacker pop, and then bind it together with these really powerful Brian May guitar melodies. Now, stylistically, this is all very interesting, but really the thing that I think sells Timmy Sean's music to me personally is the density and level of detail in his music. Barely a second goes by without some sort of hidden lick popping out or some kind of tweaked background vocal that really makes this worth a repeated listen over and over again. The hooks will get you on this album, but those more subtle layers are what's going to keep you coming back. Okay, next up I got J Dilla's Donuts.
Working on it. Working on it. Work it out, work it out, work it out. You know. Working on it. Working on it. Working on it.
J Dilla's been kind of floating around in my various wish lists for decades, but my recent interest in Madlib kind of brought me to this one. And I kind of was sifting through to figure out which one of J Dilla's albums to get, because I'd heard that they were all quite good. But this one pretty much got near universal acclaim. And even with that, I had a little bit of apprehension because the track listing shows, you know, about 30 some odd 1 to 2.5 minute songs on it. And to me, that sort of is a red flag for half-finished ideas. But the good news is it's completely not the case with this album. In fact, the majority of the tracks seg almost seamlessly from one to the other, giving the impression of like this sort of ongoing lattice work of ideas flowing from one to the next. Seen as a whole, Donuts is another album that sort of can be compared favorably to the real, you know, classic instrumental hip-hop album Introducing from DJ Shadow. But even in and of itself, this is thought of as a really important and seminal album in this sort of genre of instrumental hip-hop. And with good reason. Donuts is a real crisp, seamless recording with a level of artistic success that really kind of belies the unfortunate conditions of its creation. Because whenever J Dilla was making this album, he was actually terminally ill, very sick. And it's my understanding that 29 of the 30 some odd tracks on this album were actually recorded from his hospital room while he was in treatment for his illness. Samples were pulled from records that were brought into him by the crate, and he would kind of sift through them and find the things he was most interesting. By the way, whoever it was that brought him a copy of Frank Zappa's Baby Snakes really should be commended, because it's really kind of fun to hear Frank Zappa do a voiceover on this style of music. The album ended up being released within about 3 days of J Dilla's passing, so it stands as a testament not only to his artistic vision, but also his fortitude. Okay, next up I got Mid-Air Thieves, Crumbling. Midair Thief is a pseudonym for an anonymous and reclusive South Korean bedroom pop artist. And he's another one of those guys that kind of guards his anonymity very closely. He almost never has his picture taken, and when he does, he wears a rubber horse mask. And even his collaborations on this album, he collaborated with this Korean singer, Summer Soul, and they never met. You know, this was all done by file sharing, and her vocals were added without actually meeting him live. Now, the album Crumbling, despite being kind of largely ignored in a lot of critical circles, has seen consistent advocacy on like aggregate, fan-driven music sites like, Rate Your Music, making it somewhat of a contemporary cult classic. It's won several Korean music awards, but beyond that, really hasn't received very much promotion or no attention, with most of its publicity really being through word of mouth. And the album itself is kaleidoscopic and psychedelic, and it has an ever-shifting nature that's really difficult to pin down. It's rather like what would happen if 100 Gex was like a yacht rock band. Everything is surprising, but nothing is jarring. It's like a dream in which one scene flows from one to the other, with only like the sort of narrative of the song to hold it together. Any referent that I might offer up to you to help you kind of get an understanding of what Midair Thief is like, they're all kind of contemporary psychedelic groups. Sean Lennon's early work, the Flaming Lips, and especially Grizzly Bear. Like all these groups, Midair Thief has a visceral, tactile approach to music that has a deep narrative capacity to it. And next up I got Wednesday, Rat Saw God.
What you've been chosen to deserve. I'm the girl that you've chosen to deserve.
Several of the albums on this particular post are albums that I kind of had on my wish list for a good chunk of last year, and they started popping up on year-end best of lists, and this was one of them. In particular, this was cited as like a contemporary rock album, and I'm like, what does rock even mean today? What is a rock album these days? Now, in the case of Rat Saw God, what that means is big guitar hook, but these brasher moments are sort of smoothed over by just a hint of the fundamental harmonic conventions of Americana and the occasional lap steel guitar. Now, instrumentally, that's all well and good. There's a whole lot of stuff on this album to like on the musical side, but I do have to take some exception to the vocal approach on this album. Singer Kelly Hartzman kind of pushes her vocal delivery up into her nose quite a bit, giving it a little bit of the nasal quality, but more distractingly, I think, is she really likes to manipulate the break in her voice, kind of the spot where a yodel will happen in your voice. And I think in her case, she's trying to use it for dramatic effect, but for me, it just becomes distracting after a bit. Next up, I got Lorraine's I Killed Your Dog.
Killed your dog, I killed your. I felt the waves hitting my face and built a new one in its place. I killed your dog, I killed your dog. It made me happy.
Lorraine was another artist that kind of floated around on my wish list all last year, and actually had a couple previous albums that were things that I was looking at. And this album again showed up on a bunch of year-end lists, and I thought I would check it out. And in checking it out, it's kind of soft, fuzzy textures gave me the impression of like a Lynchian dream pop album, but vocals have this sort of jazzy R&B style approach. And that doesn't really fit the dream pop style so much, so I was really interested in how these two styles were kind of fitting together, and then halfway through the album, this sort of random cacophonous drum breakdown happened, and I was like sold on that moment. It really defeated my expectations. These juxtapositions are kind of Lorraine's modus operandi. She excels at setting up an expectation and then subverting it. For example, the name of the album and the name of the title track is I Killed Your Dog. That's a pretty harsh statement. It's even hard to even say it because it sounds so violent. But you listen to the song and it sounds like it could be a ballad about a person just taking a walk on the beach and watching the sun go down. It's a very relaxing, mellow feel to the song. And add to that subversion the realization that ultimately the whole song is a metaphor and she's talking about herself. It becomes apparent that Lorraine is really like playing clever games and enjoying doing it. And that's the final subversion, because the album clearly has an experimental bent, but in her own estimation, I Killed Your Dog is Lorraine's idea of an anti-breakup album. The driving theme behind the album is that she's sort of compassionately talking to her past self about the future heartbreak ahead of her and how it's all worth it in the end. And finally, I got A Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste by Ministry. working at a Hastings mall store when A Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste came out. And it was way, way too confrontational for like regular daytime hours. But there's a guy on staff that liked to put it on after hours and sort of closing down the store. And I kind of, got exposed to it at that point. But I really wasn't in the market for this sort of thing back then. I was just kind of getting my mind wrapped around the idea that there was more to Nine Inch Nails than Meet the Eye. And this album was even a step further than that. Even though it clearly had a relationship to Head Like a Hole, its over-the-top intensity kind of kept me at arm's length, initially at least. Recently, however, I've had an interest in multi-instrumentalist and drummer Bill Rieflin, who got his start in ministry, but has this path, a very interesting path, that led him to be one of King Crimson's drummers in one of their last incarnations. I'm very interested in how he contributed to the foundations of this like industrial style of music in the 90s, and then how that eventually led him into the ranks of King Crimson. But to approach the album on its own, the most immediate aspect of it that really floored me was its production. Every sound is maxed. Big drums, big guitars, and a really, really interesting vocal approach that kind of, if you put a microscope on it, it sounds like you've got this stadium full of people just singing like hedonistic gang-style vocals, and you squish it into a little bitty ball, and then you hide it inside of the music, and it gives it a very disorienting feel about the actual size suggested by the music. This unique production is made even more curious, I think, by the album's 1989 release date, because, even though it would be foolhardy to say that there's no electronic manipulation going on in this album, that's not true at all, but the level of electronic manipulation back then was way different than it is today. No, there's no Pro Tools, right? That sort of digital audio workstation style of production wasn't even in existence. So you could assume there was more human hands in this album than there probably would be on a contemporary album of the same style. And with that in mind, Bill Rieflin plays with a terrifying aggression and a really inhuman intensity, and that's all made more intimidating by the production of the album. But this maximal production is also the thing that kind of works against the album to a degree, because I feel like The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste is kind of broken into thirds. The first third of the album is like this intense opening salvo of 3 or 4 songs that are all amazing, just fist-pumping, aggressive, thrash-style dance music. And the middle section is more the same. So although I wouldn't call it monotonous, by the middle point of the album, it starts to feel monotonal. It's all loud, it's all maximal, and the impact that you had at the beginning of the album starts to lessen in this part of the second third of the album. The final third, I think, has these interesting little experiments tucked away, like a hip-hop industrial crossover, and then a couple of kind of real bleak soundscapes. And these are kind of tucked at the back of the album, almost as if like, Alex Jorgensen wanted to hide them back there. But it would have been interesting, I think, to kind of put them throughout the album and spread it out to kind of give it more of a pacing. And that's all I got for you guys this time around. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it out with your friends. Also, follow me over on Spotify. This list is going on. I've got representative tracks from all these songs. And if you want to follow along and become part of my viewer's choice and see how these albums stack up against the things we were listening to earlier this year, please sign up to my Patreon below. And until you see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.